Hello, so I am Tiffany and I am from Fairbanks and will be presenting on the last week of January and a week at the end of March as weather. So here we see the large difference between continental and maritime, with continental being Fairbanks and much larger degrees of temperature swings, and the ocean taking a lot more time to warm up, so therefore in Sandpoint we don't see as much of a variation because the ocean has to vary too in order for the temperature to vary. Pressure, we see a lot less of variation in March than we do in January, February. Relative humidity in January, February, we see that there's pretty high relative humidities. Excuse me, and in March we see that the relative humidity and the dew point temperature is pretty similar. And then here we can see decent amount of low pressure activity, especially along the Aleutians. Here again, less low temperatures, some highs over near Russia. Yeah. Here you can see decent amount of clouds, some dark strips and some dark patches, but quite a lot going on. Here, March, it's pretty cloudy, but Fairbanks in particular isn't super cloudy. And on the 28th there, that's not too cloudy either, and quite a lot going on in the infrared and water vapor. You can see. So, addressing the questions. The seasonal and daily changes based on location. So Sandpoint is a maritime culture, and in January, the range was generally under 10 degrees. So I had 11, 5, and 5. Fairbanks, the continental location in January, a much larger difference, 20, 13, and 15. Sandpoint in March, again, did not have a huge variation, 3, 7, and 9. Fairbanks had a relatively large variation, 34, 31, and 12. So we see that consistently the maritime location had less of a range of temperatures, and the continental location had a much larger range in March than January, which I believe would be due to the increase of the lighting. So here, addressing the second point, in January, both locations had temperatures with a climatology temperature lower than the actual temperature. And in March, Sandpoint's temperature was lower than the climatology temperature. So we can see that in Fairbanks, there is clear skies and warmer actual temperature than climatology. In January, see pretty clear skies, and Sandpoint had a warmer temperature in January with relatively clear skies, and clear skies in March with colder temperatures. Both nighttime warming and daytime warming would be reflected due to differences in clouds. Clouds always act as an insulator, which sometimes helps warm and sometimes does not. So changes based on the movement of air masses. We can see the principles we looked at in class come to life here when we look at this. In Sandpoint, January 25, we see higher temperatures and more cloud cover, very low pressure readings, and a low pressure system right here. So here, this picture right here helps show us more cloud cover and more. So when we get into March, the effects of clouds on Sandpoint is a lot less obvious, I would say. But there is a great example of dew point temperatures. March 27 of Sandpoint is located in a very dark section. So yeah, right there, of the water vapor map, and it has a high dew point. So one last thing. March in Fairbanks is harder to see how clouds affect the temperature as well. there is a good example of water vapor and dew point relationships on the 27th. Again, there also is evidence of March 27th being under a low. We can see that low pressure right there. So, winds. We can notice the flow from high pressure systems to low pressure systems. The changes in weather flow, or follow the changes in wind. And the directions of weather often affect what it's bringing. The directions of the wind affect what the wind is bringing. So the new thing that's coming. And if the winds were to move, we can see movement in clouds. So here we can see a low pressure, and then a low pressure there, and a low pressure there. So you can see that the low pressure is moving. So, meteorological conditions of Fairbanks in January. Low level temperature inversion is one of the reasons there is generally cold temperatures. There is no high pressure directly influencing Fairbanks. El Nino, and if there was a high pressure directly influencing Fairbanks, it could create a positive feedback through low level temperature inversion. So, yeah. Here we can see that it's relatively cloudy, and just that high pressure, but nothing too close. So without the high pressure, it's harder to have a temperature inversion, which our climatology book stated was the main reason for it being so cold generally. So meteorological conditions of Fairbanks in March. Looking at the weather maps, we notice no high pressure systems near Fairbanks, and there is relatively clear skies as well. So it's common for there to be frequently clear skies here, according to our Climate of Alaska book. Also, the snow starts to melt, which creates a positive warming feedback. Same deal as the ice albedo. So one thing that would help March to be closer to the climatology thing was if there was more snow. It would have warmed slower because there wouldn't be that intense heat being absorbed into it. There'd be more heat reflecting. The absorption in the warming process would have happened slower. And so here we can see no significant high pressures, which would help keep the temperature inversion from happening. So a strong low pressure system. The strong low pressure system made the Aleutian Sandpoint area have a greater chance of stormy weather. And Fairbanks weather would have higher pressure by several degrees when there is a strong low pressure system in the Aleutians, creating more stable weather. So let me explain my last point there. So see here, low pressure, strong low pressure system has all these isobars. And remember, the isobars mean a certain number of changes. So if it's a really strong low pressure system in the Aleutian area, then there's going to be all these isobars in between, the pressure of the Aleutians and the pressure of Fairbanks. Here you can see it's like 901 and 848, so a decent number of change. So which is more sensitive to climate change? Well, Fairbanks is close to the poles, where the climate change is most severe, and Sandpoint is coastal, so the rise in sea level could have a really extremely dramatic effect if it does rise significantly. Part of that area could be covered in water. And if you look at the difference between the actual differences in temperature and climatology, or the actual temperature, actual average temperature and the climatology average, Fairbanks has a larger variation than Sandpoint does. But looking in our textbook, it was saying how the higher you are, the larger latitude degree you are, the more climate change will affect you due to the positive feedback in the pole or amplification. Okay, so thank you for watching and good luck on your finals.